From 1988 to 1990, the Oakland A's dominated the American League, winning an average of 102 games during that 3-year period. That included a near-flawless performance, going 12-1 in the American League Championship Series games. However, despite their 3 World Series appearances, Oakland was only able to get 1 title. For me, these Oakland Athletics were the first team to introduce me to baseball. But even after their dominance and the massive changes, I still liked the Oakland A's, as I enjoyed following them despite some rough years. It just absolutely sucks that the A's are no longer representing Oakland. It disappoints me greatly. With this video, I just want to talk about the Oakland A's in the 90s and talk about some of my memories of this franchise that I really like. So to begin, one item that I just want to get out of the way is that I will not talk about steroids at all in this video. So with that out of the way, next item I want to talk about is while watching the A's as a kid, their uniforms were so beautiful, so crisp and clean. Yes, the green and gold with the elephant logo adds to that special illumination, but there was something else. Then one day my father said when he was in high school, his baseball team wanted to be just like the A's. And one of the few reasons he mentioned is that everyone on his team had white cleats, just like the Oakland A's. And then it hit me. As from my point of view, those perfect A's uniforms looked even better with more aura due to those white cleats, which were awesome. And then one more item to mention before I start getting into the A's in the 90s. My first favorite MLB player was Dave Parker, who played for the A's in 1988 and 1989. I was so much of a Dave Parker fan in the late 80s that I even traded away a Mickey Mantle card for 3 normal Dave Parker A's cards. Everyone at school thought I was crazy, but it was just a Kmart Mickey Mantle card. Alright, so let's get into it right now. The Oakland Athletics in the 90s. So after a World Series loss in 1988 to the Dodgers, but a World Series championship defeating the Giants in 1989, the A's, they made a 3rd consecutive World Series appearance, but were upset and swept by the Cincinnati Reds in the 1990 World Series. For the 1991 MLB season, everything was still intact for the A's to win another division title and make another World Series appearance. The A's were so talented and so well balanced. Of course, there was the power and run producers with Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, Dave Henderson, and Harold Baines. Oakland had speed with the greatest leadoff hitter ever in Ricky Henderson. In addition, the defense was tremendous, especially with the left side of the infield with shortstop Walt Weiss and third baseman Carney Lansford, who manager Tony La Russa always spoke highly in terms of how well he could handle the bat. Furthermore, behind the plate was Terry Steinbach, one of the better hitting catchers at the time, and also Steinbach, who was really good behind the plate. He was excellent at throwing out base stealers. Then on the mound, Oakland had very strong pitching with their starters and bullpen with Dave Stewart, Bob Welch, and Mike Moore, then Dennis Eckersley closing out games. More on him later on. But in 1991, Oakland, they did finish above 500 at 84-78, but finished 11 games behind the first place Minnesota Twins, as I remember being really surprised that Oakland did not get back to the postseason this year. Oakland's pitching staff, thus perhaps the best in the AL for the past 3 years, wound up being one of the worst in the American League. Furthermore, injuries were an issue, and Mark McGwire had his worst season as an A up to this point. But in 1992, things would get back to typical Oakland A's baseball. However, during the season, one of the most surprising trades occurred, as I think this was the first time I can remember being extremely shocked regarding a sports news story and not something happening on the field. So every morning as a kid, as soon as I woke up, I would hustle down and get the morning paper, grab the sports section, and then go straight to the box scores and stats near the back of the sports section. But on this particular morning in 1992, when the A's were on their way to another AL West title, I remember opening the paper, flipping the pages to get to the stats and scores, but then stopping promptly and seeing a headline that Jose Canseco, perhaps the biggest name in baseball at the time, was traded. The craziest part of this trade was that Canseco was on deck when the trade went through. Hence, Canseco had to be called back to the dugout to be pinch hit for. Canseco was traded to the Texas Rangers for 3 big league players who I knew a lot and saw a lot at the time, and starting pitcher Bobby Witt, closer Jeff Russell, but the big name coming back was switch hitting outfielder Ruben Sierra to bat in the middle of the A's order. Sierra, he didn't put up Canseco-like numbers, but did drive in a lot of runs and hit for some power for Oakland. So I just want to pull up the main players on the 1992 A's, as Oakland did go on to win their 4th AL West title in 5 years. In 1992, Tony La Russa was named the AL Manager of the Year. Meanwhile, A's closer Dennis Eckersley would win the Cy Young, but also would win the MVP. And at the time, I remember thinking that was really strange for a reliever to get the MVP award. Well, anyways, so it's back to the ALCS for Oakland going up against Toronto. However, Oakland would not get back to the World Series as a fatal blow for Oakland happened in Game 4. So during this game, Toronto, they had a 2-1 lead in the best-of-7 series. And in this pivotal Game 4, Oakland had a 6-4 lead in the ninth inning with the AL MVP, Dennis Eckersley, on the mound to close it out. But instead, Toronto Blue Jays second baseman Roberto Alomar hit a game-tying 2-run home run in the ninth. Subsequently, the Blue Jays won Game 4 in 10 innings and wound up winning the 1992 ALCS in 6 games to advance to the World Series. Now, I don't know if anyone knew it at the time, but this would be the end of an impressive era. Looking back, it seemed that the Roberto Alomar home run was a shot that symbolized the end of quite an era for this Oakland A's franchise. But going forward, I was still interested and a fan of the Oakland A's. Alright, the 1993 MLB season and the new-look Oakland A's. Dave Stewart, Harold Baines, and Mike Moore, they signed elsewhere as free agents. Carney Lansford, he retired. Walt Weiss was traded to Florida. And Mark McGwire, he only played 27 games in 1993. And Rickey Henderson, he was traded to Toronto on July 31st. As it was not the same seeing the Oakland A's. In fact, seeing Dave Stewart and Rickey Henderson playing for Toronto in the 1993 ALCS was extremely strange, as I've been so used to seeing these two play in the ALCS wearing green and gold and not blue. So here are the main players in the 1993 Oakland A's. I still kept in Rickey Henderson, but nonetheless, as you can see, much different. Oakland finished the 93 season 68-94, and obviously, it's a new era, a new direction. One player that I want to talk about, who is expected to be a main part of Oakland's future, is Todd Van Poppel. So Van Poppel was talked about so highly as one of the best prospects. I remember all this praise for Van Poppel with all of his potential. And I also remember thinking, how did the mighty A's get this supposed can't-miss prospect in Van Poppel in the draft despite always being so good? Later I found out Van Poppel fell in the draft due to signability issues. Scott Boras was his agent, and this was before slot value for draft picks. So Oakland, they wound up selecting Van Poppel 14th in the 1990 MLB draft and signed him to the largest deal ever for a draft pick. Oakland, they had the 14th selection because of compensation after Milwaukee signed Dave Parker. But anyways, 1993 was Van Poppel's first real season. However, Van Poppel, he never lived up to the hype throughout his career. A part of that was due to Van Poppel's contract being placed on the 40-man roster, which limited his time in the minor leagues developing, meaning a fast track to the majors. Another pitcher who I'd like to mention was Steve Karsay, who was acquired from the Blue Jays when Oakland traded away Rickey Henderson to the Blue Jays. And Karsay, he was another pitcher whom I heard so much about in regards to his talent. However, it did not work out for Karsay. I remember wondering if Karsay disappeared because he missed all of 1995 and 1996 with elbow injuries. These were two pitchers that were expected to lead the A's pitching staff for years to come. What wound up happening was that A's pitching would be giving up a lot of runs for years to come. Last thing about the 1993 season, one of my favorite players ever, Dave Henderson, played his final season in Oakland in 1993. When people go back and talk about the personalities on those Oakland A's teams, I think one name that doesn't get mentioned enough was Dave Henderson, who did hit around 20 to 25 home runs in a season for Oakland, which was really good back then. But then I have to mention, to me, Henderson had a strange home run trot, and also when a lazy fly ball was hit to Henderson in center field, he sometimes licked his fingers and tested the wind while the ball was in the air and caught it with some swag. Enter the 1994 MLB season, Rickey Henderson would actually come back to Oakland and sign with the A's. This 94 season was a season that ended in mid-August due to a strike. Oakland finished with a 51-62 record. However, they were only one game behind the first-place Mariners when the season was canceled. I would have loved to see how that 94 season would have played out in regards to that AL West division. I remember wanting Oakland to make the postseason that year with a poor record. In 1994, Oakland, they began playing a couple players I really liked, an outfielder, Geronimo Baroa, who I was a huge fan of, and third baseman Scott Brosius, who I really liked before he went to the Yankees. In 1994, Mark McGwire, he had only played 47 games. 1994 would also be the final MLB season for 1990 AL Cy Young Award winner Bob Welch, as his 27 wins in 1990 will never be forgotten by me. Alright, so in 1995, baseball would resume. Mark McGwire, he'd get back to being on the field again and hit 39 home runs. Dave Stewart would make a return to Oakland, signing as a free agent. But 1995 would be Stewart's last MLB season, as he had an ERA that season close to 7. In 1995, the A's, they finished with a 67-77 record. This season would also be the final season for Tony La Russa managing the Oakland A's, then heading to St. Louis next season. Also, after the 1995 MLB season, Dennis Eckersley, he was traded from Oakland to St. Louis. Enter the 1996 MLB season. Art Howe is a new A's manager, and I really like this A's team a lot. One of my favorite MLB teams. Perhaps it was due to the potent mixture of some old school A's and their young talent. Mark McGwire smashed 52 home runs, and Terry Steinbach, still on the A's in 1996, had his best offensive season with Oakland by far, hitting 35 home runs and driving in 100 runs. Meanwhile, Geronimo Barroa, he had 36 home runs as the Athletics hit 243 home runs this year. 14 behind the league leader Baltimore Orioles, who at this time broke a record for most team home runs in a season. Also in 1996, Jason Giambi would begin to be an everyday player, and he hit 20 home runs in 1996, and Matt Stairs would start to become a contributor for Oakland as he was awesome for the A's for the upcoming years. Then there's a pitching staff, which again was one of the worst. So, you had this team that was slugging the ball in one of the tougher places to hit, and on the other hand, the pitching staff would be one of the worst, despite being in a pitcher-friendly park. The 1996 A's, I remember them being in the playoff hunt, being around that 500 mark in the middle of the season, but then in the end, Oakland, they finished 12 games behind the Texas Rangers with a 78-84 record. Enter the 1997 MLB season, and here's the roster and stats from the position players. Terry Steinbach would play for Minnesota in 1997, but returning, being the team's DH, would be Jose Canseco, who would make his final appearance as an Oakland A this season. The 1997 season wasn't as enjoyable to follow as the 96 season, but maybe that's mostly due to Oakland finishing with a 65-97 record, not smashing as many home runs. Geronimo Barroa did get traded in the middle of the season, but the big trade happened on July 31, 1997, when Oakland traded Mark McGwire, who was going to be a free agent after the season, as Big Mac was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals for Eric Ludwig, TJ Matthews, and Blake Stein. At the time, McGwire, he was really smashing the ball into the stands, perhaps had a really solid shot at breaking Roger Maris's single-season home run record of 61 home runs in 1997. And Mark McGwire, he wound up hitting 58 total home runs, 34th Oakland, 24th St. Louis, but nonetheless, I always remember those three names that Oakland got back, waiting to see how they pan out. But in the end, wound up being not a good return at all for Oakland. As for McGwire, he did wind up signing an extension to stay in St. Louis, and in 1998, Mark McGwire, he did break Roger Maris's single-season home run record. Now also in 1997, of course, Oakland, they'd finished with one of the worst pitching staffs in baseball, and strangely, not one starter on Oakland staff would have more than 6 wins in 1997. Enter the 1998 MLB season, and this would be the first season where Billy Beane would be the general manager of the Oakland A's, remain the GM for over a quarter century with the ball club. And Billy Beane's first trade was acquiring pitcher Kenny Rogers from New York, and departing for the Big Apple would be Scott Brosius. Brosius, he had a terrible 97 season for Oakland after a really solid 1996 season. Brosius wound up being a very clutch player for the Yankees, but as for Oakland, wow, they finally had a starter they could rely on in Kenny Rogers, who went 16-8 with a 3.17 ERA in 1998. But what I want to show you now are the main position players. Yes, Ricky Henderson would be on the 1998 A's, as this would be his fourth and final stint with the A's. But aside from the A's legend, future AL MVP Jason Giambi would be the first baseman and the cornerstone for years to come, and future AL MVP Miguel Tejada from this point on would be the everyday shortstop. And also appearing for Oakland this season would be 20-year-old Eric Chavez, who in my humble opinion, I thought was the best defensive third baseman I ever saw, while adding in about 30 home runs a season, as it really surprised me that he never made an all-star team. That just baffles me. Now later on, there'll be so much talk about Oakland's big three regarding their starting pitchers, more on them later on, but Oakland had quite the trio of position players in place in Giambi, Tejada, and Chavez. Now Oakland, they also had Ben Grief, who became the AL Rookie of the Year in 1998, would have a couple of seasons hitting in the high 20s in home runs, but then would be sent after the 2000 season and part of a 3-team deal, and in return, Oakland, they get Johnny Damon, Mark Ellis, and Corey Lytle, who would all be solid contributors for the Oakland Athletics. So the 1998 Oakland A's, they finished 74-88, but for the following year, it'd be a very enjoyable year, keeping track of the Oakland A's. Alright, so entering the 1999 MLB season, and remember, not much was expected with the Oakland A's being competitive. Another subpar season was expected from what I remember. Now Oakland, once again, they'd be smashing home runs, and a player I remember enjoying watching this season was John Jaha, and I liked him a lot with Milwaukee, but injury problems got in the way. But Jaha, he signed a minor league deal with Oakland, And then he would go on to surprisingly hit 35 home runs this season in 1999. And along with that, Matt Stairs, he hit 28 home runs. Jason Giambi, he hit 33 home runs. And then Grieve and Tejada, they each hit more than 20 dingers. As for the pitchers, let me start off by saying that during the 99 season, Kenny Rogers, who's traded to the Mets for Terrence Long, was all right for the A's in the coming years. Now, during the 99 season, the first of the big three pitchers to make his MLB debut would be Tim Hudson, who would debut in June, making 21 starts in 1999 and become a great addition to the pitching staff. And I loved watching Hudson pitch with his windup, sinker, and splitter. Furthermore, there were some other interesting names that would be added during the season. There was Omar Olivares, who was acquired in a trade with Anaheim. And for some reason, he was a pitcher I remember the most from this 99 team. And I think that's because from my point of view, it seemed like that in the final 2 months, Olivares was frequently and always on the mound for Oakland. Then also during the 99 season at the trade deadline, Oakland acquired Kevin Appier, who was a tremendous pitcher for Kansas City previously, but he had a rough 99 season, but it was fun seeing him pitch for Oakland in 1999 and 2000, one of my favorite lineups ever. Alright, the 1999 Oakland A's, as mentioned earlier, not much was expected from this team, and they were hovering around that 500 mark until about the end of July. Now Texas, they're running away with the division, but at this time, there was one wildcard spot to be had, and going back to Baseball Reference, Oakland, they're 3.5 games behind Toronto for that final wildcard spot at the end of July. So I think around this time, my love of baseball is kind of dwindling, and in short, that was due to how the economics are playing out and how predictable MLB was becoming and the way it's being covered by the media, but that's all for another time. But anyways, this 1999 A's team, they kind of stopped that downward trajectory of me losing interest in baseball. I love this team so much. So the A's, they played better in August and September. However, so was Boston. Oakland was in striking distance as they're one game behind Boston in early September to take that one and only wildcard spot in the American League. And Toronto, they kind of dropped out of the wildcard race. However, in the end, Boston, they pulled away and they wound up being 7 games better than Oakland when the 99 season ended. But what would transpire after the 1999 MLB season? Pitchers Mark Mulder and Barry Zito would make their MLB debuts and would team up with Tim Hudson to form that dynamic big three on the mound. But moreover, Oakland, they then go on to make the postseason the next 4 years. However, in a best of 5 American League Division Series, it sucked that the A's lost 3-2 in each of those 4 ALDS series. Thank you so much for watching this video about the Oakland A's in the 90s. Leave a comment below, tell me what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for all the support.